So I think we're here to talk about Bald Eagle Boys Camp, and you and I have been involved from the very beginning of the development of camp, and a lot of things have transpired that the next generation is not even aware of. So maybe we'll just talk about how camp vision was, and finding a camp, and then developing of it as we went along.
It all started in 1989 at a public relations meeting in Lititz, PA at the Midway Reception Center, presented by a group of Fair Play Boys Camp in South Carolina. They made the presentation there. At that meeting, God laid the vision on the hearts of two men, Dave Stoltzfus and Stan Hartzler, after an appeal was made to start a camp in PA due to the distance and the need to serve more boys in the South. That was the reason for the starting of the camp, was because there were boys from here that would go to the South, and the boys, the parents or the guardians are required every 6 weeks to have a meeting here with the boy to see how his evaluation is, or how his progress is. They evaluate him. He sets goals and he'll reset his goals. So for parents to travel from Pennsylvania to South Carolina every 6 weeks was hard, and they were full, so they needed to have somewhere else to go, and so they encouraged us to start at the camp, and that's how the other camps have started. When we were looking for a camp, there were some areas of importance. One was a size where the boys had much room privately to roam. The location was very important, and some of the location was in where there was water available for activity, and also then think of the need for medical assistance if there was need of any. But it was also very important to be private from occupied buildings and so forth. It was important to have a lot of trees around, just simply that was wilderness, what it really was. And one of the large areas that, of course, important in looking for land was something that is affordable. How many places I looked at before we came to this one would have been in West Virginia. We looked at one, was very ideal property, but due to some family issues, it was not available. And secondly, we looked out on the Peacock Road, far to the west, and we found some properties there that were very ideal, but there was one property that we thought would have been ideal with a campsite right in a hunting camp right in the center of it, and that was not acceptable. And so then the third property that I would have looked at would have been this very property here, which was an ideal property. This property was used for prospecting for coal, and some reason or other there has not been much coal found here. We did find one place where they had a deep mining. There was a hole that we came to where they had deep mining, but it apparently was run out. And then there was a lot of prospecting. There was a road where there was prospecting. There was many holes, like well drilling holes, but they found not enough of coal on this property to justify moving on. We bought it from an individual that had the coal company. He was very much interested. Richie Mays had a daughter that was killed. I don't know how it was anymore. And he wanted us to have this property. He was very much wanted us to have this property. And so he went to he did a lot of researching and a lot of trying to make it sure that we can get it. It was very interesting in acquiring this property. We when we first discovered the area, we walked up here, about 3 of us board members walked up through the ravine by a topo map. We came right up to the chuck wagon, where the chuck wagon is now, and we said, this is the property. The cost of the initial property was $350 an acre, which was very reasonable. And as I mentioned, I want to give credit to Richie Mays for that. He told me that he will do that on the basis of a memorial of his daughter being killed in an auto accident. And that was, he had a lot in it. But after we got camp started, he sort of dropped off. He was a very private type of a man, but he was good to deal with. He did not want to deal with any attorneys whatsoever. Everything that we worked up here was all just verbal. He even offered to build us a road from the back side of the camp, and there was no writing on it. There was absolutely no writing. When we came to make settlement, any agreements that we had was not documented. It was just our word and his word. And that's the only way he would, if we went to deal with much legal, he would have walked out from us, because he had that much against the legal authorities like attorneys and so forth. He did what he had to, but no more. Further, we had a meeting with him, with Richie Mays one day, and everything seemed to be well. We, in turn, checked out the deed of the property and found out that indeed there was a glitch in the deed. There was, many years ago, there was 3 entrepreneurs that had bought the property. They lost it, they went bankrupt. 2 of them signed off, the one didn't. Thus it made it possible for one owner, or one former owner, and his family to have access to 1/3 of this property. The present owner, was very badly upset about that. He finally said, well, he's going to try to find what he can do. But we told him in the meantime that we cannot have a property as such, so we would be searching elsewhere. We did, but within 2 weeks, he had us a clear deed. What all took place, I don't know, but there was many things that took place at that time. The acreage at the very beginning was 450 some, and then I'd like to go back and just review a bit in the purchase of the property. He was very interested in us having the property, and so he even developed a plan for us to get a road up here, because all that we had was a road that the power line, was the power line road, we called it, was very steep. I would take my pickup, and occasionally in going back down, we would slide from corner to corner because it might have been wet. But anyway, we needed to have a road. There was a bridge on the back side of the property that was absolutely not reliable, because the undershoring had washed out so bad. We bought another 88 acres on the front side of the property, which was the proper setting for the road. It was a mountainside, and it was thought it was impossible, but we had an engineer who was willing to engineer that and put a road in on the side of the mountain. It's like putting a bench on the side of the mountain, and that's the road that we have now. Of course, we just plowed a road in there, and incidentally, the plowing of the road was not as simple as it sounds. We had a D10 Caterpillar in 1993. In March of 1993, we had a D10 Caterpillar coming up the power line road and working his way down through from the top down. When he got down to the first main corner, we had a snowstorm on March the 13th of 1993 that closed Route 80, and it shut us down for 1 week. We had this dozer rented, and we're naturally paying a high price for renting it. But we couldn't move on until the snow was somewhat taken care of. Now, then he continued with that road and went down and just cut in basically a road down to 120. Well, we thought that was all right until the county or township came in, I'm not sure which it was, and they told us that we need to have a lot more done. We needed to have a corner off of 120 that a semi could come from the north and come around and make his turn around coming up the road. Well, in order to do so, we had to move a mountain. And I didn't pay too much attention to it, and finally I got a certified letter, and I came and met the person at the road, and he was as angry as a bulldog. And he said because I didn't respond properly, he has the right to sue me or to arrest us for about $2,500. And I said, well, what can we do? And where can we send the money? We will do what we can, but we will send you the money. And he kept fumbling around. Finally, he said, well, if you do so-and-so, in 2 weeks' time, he said, I will forgive it. And so we decided we would do that immediately. We got in contact with our excavating company, and he moved 250 dump truckloads of dirt from the corner and came and filled up the other two corners that are on the lane, and we put pipes in, drain pipes in, and so forth. And he never said. I checked with him to see if he looked it over. No, he hadn't looked it over, but he never gave me the clearance to go ahead. But we knew we had it some way, and we went on. And from there on, we were able to work. Things that we needed was water. So we had to find out, is there water available for well?
And so that brings up another interesting part of this story. We brought up a well driller and drilled how many wells to find water?
We drilled one well to find water here. We drilled one well on the property here. The geologist told us that there is no water available from the top of this mountain. He said he walked the perimeter and he needed to find a stream going out of the mountain, and it was not there. He told us that there was no water. We, in feeling that necessary to find out, we brought the well driller up, having to pulling it up with a dozer and set up, and we found only a few gallons a minute, which was not what we needed. We needed 30 gallons a minute, and therefore the water was absolutely not available here. The geologist told us there's water at the foot of the mountain, and so we prospect there.
So let's stop there. So the geologist told us there's no water, and that was so critical of developing the camp.
Correct.
But the geologist did tell us if we go down over the mountain that we can find water. And so what happened in the development of that well?
The well driller set up at the foot of the mountain where the well is at the present time in order to, by the order of the geologist, as having a aquifer there. And he set up there one day and drilled, and he came to approximately 15 gallons a minute.
Let's review that statement there. It's my understanding that several of the board met there. You circled around and you prayed for water.
My wife and I and her sister and husband came. I was interested in knowing what was going, and so we came and we talked to the well driller. He said he has 15 gallons a minute. Initially, there was a stake set where we should drill, which was close to the 120, which in reality was not the proper place because it was too close, but that's where the aquifer was. He then was drilling about 40 feet to the off to the side of where the stake had been placed. He did not find what he wanted. He said he thinks if he would move to where that stake is, possibly he would find it. Wife and I and those with us, we went and we prayed about it and decided what to do. We said, find the stake and go there. He went down that day and he found another 15-gallon a minute real soon. He said, by tomorrow morning, he said, I think I will have 15-gallon more. So he did, and we found all the water we needed. In reality, it was too close to 120, but it was so high above 120 that there was no problem with it.
So now here we have a well. We didn't drill where we originally thought, where we had prayed. We moved 40 feet and drilled, and we got more water than we knew what to do with.
Yeah.
Interesting. But now we're at the bottom of the mountain. How do we get water to the top? This is a lot of footage down over the hill. Do you take a backhoe down over the mountain? How do we get water up to the top?
How do we get water up to the top? Before I get to that, I would like to say that I would like to introduce us to the fact of what happened while we were waiting to know how to get the water to the top. The water had to be tested, and so there had to be a 24-hour pumping of that water, continuous, before it could be approved. One morning as I came here, I found out that somebody had sabotaged the rig, and the rig was no more running, so that interfered the 24-hour. The person in charge of testing it, I figured, well, we're going to have to start over. No, he said, we will take it where it is at. From there, once we had the water approved, we needed to get it to the top, which was 1,600 feet up, almost on a 45-degree angle. I lay awake myself thinking, how can I anchor a backhoe into the side of the mountain to dig a trench deep enough, because at that winter we had frosts down 6 feet. And so we decided that, yeah, it was almost impossible, but we had a person on the board or interested at that time who was a water specialist, and he told us, well, I think we can get the water to the top by putting lines on top of the ground, but we have to have it approved. He and I went to Camp Hill, and we had it approved to have the water line on top of the ground, and that's what we did.
So it's very, very interesting. I had never heard of that before, but here we are at the bottom of the mountain. We got approval now to pump the water through a pipeline on top of the ground. And then you had to have a shut-off valve for that water to drain when it wasn't flowing.
It was very interesting as to what developed after that. The water was being pumped up into a 4,000-gallon tank on top of the mountain, and it was doing fine as long as everything was working. When the pump shut off, the tank was full, the pump shut off, the water would in turn go back through the pump and run the pump at a very, very fast speed. Eventually the pump became weak and it couldn't pump very well, and we got a cold snap. It kept pumping into the line and keeping the line full. The line finally froze, and because there was no way for the water to get back. So our specialist worked up a plan and a program to where he could actually bypass the pump and it go back down into the well without going through the pump. He also put the second line in. When we were without the pump at that time, we would have water tanks bringing water in and filling our 4,000-gallon tank. The property in reality was a piece of property that was in a perfect rectangular property. But when the engineers surveyed it, they could not find how this property was rectangular, because from where they started, it was offset. And it was rather disturbing to them, but they just simply couldn't find it. So one day, the day that we had the property approved by the state, the county, and the township, they took a walk to the hill, one end of the property, and they took a walk and they came to a rock pile. And they put that into their computer, and they found out that by putting that in, it brings the property to a perfect rectangular property. And then I said, well, it's going to be taking property from others if we move the lines from where we thought they were. And the one statement that I remember well, the engineer saying, rock piles don't lie. And that was interesting. Now, in so doing, I need to bring into the fact that brought our road. We were going to have to go through a ravine because of the way the lay of the land was. And when they did that, we were able to bring that road at a position that it was not through a ravine. It was just perfect, coming past what we have now, the first staff house. And so that was another one of the miracles that came about. We did then, of course, with other things, we did some trading of property and as to what we have now. But the electricity needed to come up, and it needed to come up by there. And so they told us that it would cost us about $45,000 to bring the electricity up, $5,000 for the telephone. And so one day I met the supervisor, and I told him that they would be welcome to use our road to come up instead of they having to service a high line wire, a high voltage wire across the property. They had to use their road and use even equipment to pull their equipment up to service the line. And so I told him that we would give them permission to use our road. And I left it at that. The next time that I met him here at camp, he told us that he would, if he could get a right-of-way to use our road, they paid us a little bit for a right-of-way. They would bring the electricity to the first house free. And if we would dig a trench to the rest of the positions where we wanted electricity, if we dig a trench, they would put it underground. In reality, we got our electricity free. Telephone company said that they would follow right after. We needed a septic system. We actually hired an engineer, and he engineered everything. He engineered the sewage systems, where the tents would be, the building, all the buildings. He engineered all of that. Engineering the septic systems was a very crucial thing. Out through these woods, you had to find a certain place where the water, where it was acceptable. We were actually building up to a small village, a community, to which came under the regulations of a small village. And so it was very, very important that we have the proper sewage systems, and some of the sewage systems we have in now were very expensive because we did not have good percolation here. So that was one of the things. We have our houses all engineered, and they were coming under strict regulation as to how we do it. We had one of our houses that we would have desired to make a duplex, and so what do? I took the plan that we had to the township office one evening with their township meeting, and I presented to them what I would like to do. I spent 5 minutes with them into telling them what I wanted to do, and their answer was, go up there and do what you want to do. Nobody cares what you're doing. He said, we will put a notice at the end of the drive as to what we're doing, and the notice was the 8x12 sheet of paper with indicating what we wanted to do. And I have never found that anybody stopped at the end of the drive to get out of their vehicle and look at that. They said that we should do what we want to do there. Now, regulations are a little more strict now than they were then, but nevertheless, there is a lot of liberty that was given to us, not because of who we were, but because of what we were doing for these boys. Did the camp have money at that point? The camp had no money, practically no money. A little bit dribbled in again and again, enough to keep us going. And so that was somewhat of a problem, of course, and that was actually a problem up until about 2000, and then things began developing in a different manner. But nevertheless, we always had enough of money to operate.
So it was a faith project from the very beginning. And even purchasing the land, it's my understanding as being on the board that we only develop the camp as money is here. We didn't borrow money. And so there's quite a large sum of money to purchase it and everything that we've already developed. So that was quite interesting to watch that develop. I was the treasurer at that time. And I remember day after day, when we needed supplies, we only bought enough for a week because we didn't have money for 2 weeks. And so it was a step-by-step process. Do you remember those times?
Having been director, do I remember the times of the finances? Having been director for 5 years, I was always, the supervisors came to me and I said, well, we don't have the money. We will buy it as we can, and that's how we did. And Dwight kept us strapped pretty hard too. He wouldn't permit us to have anything that we couldn't buy, because which was good. So we kept going in that way. How do some of the funds come? Well, the one thing that we have, which is a big asset, and Dwight, I think I'm going to let you speak more about the ice shack, if you will.
Yeah, there's a group of us was looking at what can we do in the community that is something the community can help with. They know to educate them on what the body or the camp's all about. And we came up with the idea of purchasing a old gas station and converting it into an ice cream shop. Which we did. We remodeled it. And now we have a group of 6, 7, 8 girls that work there during the summer serving ice cream. And that has become a extreme, huge fundraiser for the benefit of camp. And if you ever come to Mill Hall, Pennsylvania, you must stop and buy the ice cream cone. That's supporting the boys' camp.
The next step, of course, was that we now had to get cleared with the state to have these boys here. And so I myself was not involved in having the boys coming. I had been more involved in the physical aspect of getting the property ready to go, and the property and the buildings all built and all of that.
It was a step-by-step process. We started with 5 boys at the beginning, and that was more than we could handle. We weren't trained, we didn't have the expertise, and it threw everybody for a loop. Do you remember that, Dave?
I remember very well. We come to the place we actually had to dismiss 2 of them, I think, before we could actually operate with the 3 that we had. It was that serious because these boys were disturbed. They were very disturbed. And now they come to a place that didn't know how to even deal with their disturbances. And it was serious. It was dangerous. Not that time, but at one time we had one that took an axe, and he went after one of his supervisors or chiefs. We had that, and in relation to the starting the camp, and in the operation of the camp, each boy has his own pocket knife, and that with these type of boys is very hard to understand. But one of the key things that you want to teach that boy is responsibility. He never learned to be responsible for anything. Now he's responsible for what he has in his hand. But in the start of the camp, We didn't have the ability and didn't have the training, didn't have the knowledge to teach them those things to start with. So yes, we started with 5 boys, and it was a hurdle. And we sent 2 of them home before the first week or so.
So we started back to 3, and then we would take 1, and then 1, and then 1, until we had a core group that was knowing what camp's all about. And then we kept, as we got more training, we had meetings with Fair Play. We had people come in to train us, and till we got the core group of camp developed. And then we went up to one group of 10. And then at that point, we divided it down to 5, and then added single boys at a time onto each campsite. Do you remember, Dave, how long did it take us to go from 3 boys to actually 40?
I don't. How long did it take us to go from 3 to 40? I would say it was at least 4 or 5 years.
For around 5 years till we actually got to where camp was functioning correctly. So it's not something that you do overnight.
It's interesting to know, too, in the start of camp, this was not a new venture for us. We actually were a member of an association, the Wilderness Road Camping Association, which started back in probably in the 40s or 50s of the 1900s. And that one key person was still with us until about maybe 5-6 years ago. He passed away, an older man.
And what was his name?
Mr.
Lochmiller?
Yeah, but the one that was with us much was not Lochmiller.
But we've had much help to develop camp over those years.
So there is a manual actually that you refer to, and the principle is basically practiced, and it doesn't have to be practiced just in perfection to the way that the manual would say, but there are principles and guidelines that you would go by. And it's interesting to know that through the Bald Eagle Camp, there has now been 3 other camps that have developed from that, and the one is in Ohio, called the Ohio Wilderness Camp. The other one is in southern Pennsylvania, Allegheny. And then the one that's very interesting is in Ireland. And the one in Ireland necessarily cannot work because of their culture, cannot operate exactly the way that we would here. But they are very, very successful in their work. In starting of camp, we would have drawn supervisors and chiefs from other camps that had been trained in other camps. And after that, then we simply brought our own chiefs in. And they're usually on the ground here, at least 2 weeks in training, that's all. And then after that, they get put in a group with another chief. The chiefs are the ones that live with the boys. The supervisors are the ones that are over the grounds and over all of the camps. And they have their allotment, but basically they're over the whole camp. And so our chiefs are just simply by our word of mouth put out, and young men that are interested. A chief, when he comes here, I have seen them at the end of, they commit themselves to 2 years. I've seen them at the end of the 1 year. I've seen it actually where they would go to the end of the road and they would just pour the gas on and get out of here, and they wish they could leave. And at the end of 2 years, I have seen it to where the chief was not able to leave. I remember one chief, he would go to the landing, to the chief's lodge, and he'd spend a little time there. Then he'd come back and go back to his campsite, and he did that a number of times before he was able to leave, because that was attachment after 2 years. So 2 years is usually the limit for a chief and they can come back later on, which we've had a few, but mostly it's when they're 2 years, and then they may come back as supervisor or working in some other area in the camp. When we first started camp, we were able to use maxi vans to transport the boys wherever we wanted to go. As time went, there was somebody in the United States that got the ruling that it was unlawful for boys in a school to be transported by maxi vans. And so we were actually listed as a school. So now we had to come under that of having school buses totally equipped like a school bus in a public school. These boys never we never stopped at a place to pick up the boys. So for instance, the arm that came out was very unnecessary. The lights were unnecessary. There were many things that were not necessary. Our local authorities thought it was totally useless that we have these. We had to have them inspected every 6 months and kept on and on. And we even went to Harrisburg to try to see if we can't get it done. They said, no, it is not possible for you to do it. Today, there is a way that they're getting by. It is not that the law has changed, but they're allowing us to do it. They have the buses now painted in a white, and they're not using the lights and so forth, so they're not obvious. They don't stand out as a school bus. And the authorities are letting us go with it. The boys do a lot of trips, day trips, sometimes 3-week trips, raft trips and whatnot. All they do those, and it's all a part of the therapy and their planning. And there's a lot goes into that. And it's one of the blessings that we have of these boys being able to go and explore. And when they explore, they need to document this into their portfolio, because that is part of their education. It is very important. And there's a lot more goes into that. And so far as the portfolio is concerned, of the articles that they will be writing and documenting, and yes. Did we have any runaways while I was here? We had a number of them, but I'd like to give you the insight of the one that we had. We had a little 10-year-old he was one of the hardest one we dealt with. He was influential, and something happened in his camp, in the smallest group camp. And he had the group all stirred up, and there was several people in trying to get it straightened out. And he up and left and had 5 fellows trailing after him. They went across the ridge and came down to the 120 and across a railroad bridge that had they met met a train, it would have been very serious. They went across the other side, and from there went into Lock Haven. And when they got to Lock Haven, we have some Mennonite people living there. They knew where it was. They went to there, and they were so exhausted, they said, call camp and have them pick us up. We sent them out, and I would say the biggest mistake that I made while I was director of the camp is the fact that I should have went into Lock Haven, walked out as a duck with ducklings on my tail, to come out, walking out. They would have been so tired that they would have never wanted to do it again. But I failed to do it. But we brought them back by vehicle, and we should not have done it. So that was one of the runaways, but there was a number of others too that would be interesting to relate. It's interesting as to what families these boys come from. Dwight mentioned the fact they come from broken homes. But in my experience with the camp, there have been those that came from established homes, from where the couples were together. And there was some of the roughest we had that I remember that we had, not maybe the roughest, but some of the roughest that we had were those that came from homes that were intact, were established. And it was interesting. The boy that I said that took those 5 left the camp. Father was a pastor in a very fundamental church, but he was a tough one. I'm going to go back to that in the taking of a boy has to come in here and he has to agree that he's going to stay at camp. The parents or guardians have to agree that they're going to support him at camp, the length of camp. That's a commitment. This young man, when he came in here, it was in this office, he said that he would not come to camp. And the director at that time said, well, if that's what you say, you're not coming to camp. Well, you can imagine his mother had brought him from Indiana, driven from Indiana, and had intention of leaving him here at camp. And the director, or the program director told him, he said, you need to write a letter. If you want to come back to camp, you're going to have to write a letter to the director and tell him that you want to come back. He cursed about it, that he's not coming to this blankety-blank camp. His mother was needlessly very distraught and upset. But he did come back after a time, and he was the one that gave us a lot of problems, and he was from an established home. So we have the different ones. The saddest thing in relation to the boys that I remember of was the fact that we had one boy that they brought here and they dropped him off. Said, we don't want him anymore. We're going to have to find a home. So we had to find a home for him. That was tough. To think of a child being, it was not his biological father, but it was his biological mother. His non-biological father brought him here and dropped him off and said, no more. And there were other experiences that were very sad in relation to, but some of these boys came from established homes. As far as the boys getting back into their homes and into their society, there's a known 85% success, and that success rate on these type of boys is very high. And not giving any credit to us, but giving credit to the program. Yeah, my wife and I were here for 5 years, and I remember the importance of her on one particular occasion, not only that one, but that one particular occasion. The boys, when they have their goals, and they have their goals that they have to meet. And when they do not meet those goals, there may be a time that they're going to miss a meal. And in this case, just quickly saying, this one case, these boys were missing meal after meal after meal, just not coming in for their food. Now, they were given food outside, but not coming in. One day, she asked the supervisor, may I tell them something? And they said yes. And so she met them outside, and she said to them that she is so grateful that they don't come in. That just gives her much more food to eat when they don't come in. And that was the last meal they missed from there. I find the camp to be a very, very important, a very worthwhile in the life of my wife and I. We spent 5 years here as director, and there are, in sitting down like this, there are many things that come to my memory. Being awakened in the night with a group of boys coming to our house and saying that there's one of them that is very sick, and the road is closed between us and Lock Haven because of the ice mine cut. At that time was another part of the camp that was a very serious thing. Route 120 was closed, 50 mile around to get to Lock Haven. My wife and I, Mary, went to Renova that evening, and with a boy laying on the back seat with, I thought he was dying. And when I got up there, he got out of the car and walked into the room where we went, to this medical room. I was disturbed. And that was the type of a boy that we had. He was hypochondriac. He just simply, he would play sick. And those were some of the experiences. We could go experience after experience on some of those things. But my wife and I had 5 years, very worthwhile years here. She did a lot on the grounds here, and I was, of course, involved with the boys and the families. We actually, Mary and I were family workers. We didn't have family workers in the beginning of camp. We were family workers. We would make trips to Indiana, Ohio. I remember one day I made a trip to Indiana, left in the morning and came back in the evening. It was an about a 7-hour trip from here, just simply to interview a family that we had some need there with. And I remember that as a very difficult day. 7 hours in a little car and out, and 7 hours back, and doing the work that we needed to do. That was the family work that we were in while we were director, and yeah, that was the start of camp. People look at this as something, oh, so wonderful, and it is. But what we went through to get camp started, it would be difficult to think of having to go back to do it again, but it came one step at a time. I spent many days, we're 50 miles from here, and I would spend many days in coming here to start camp. And so it was a development. We had to meet engineer, we had to meet the township especially, and the developing of the camp was not a nickel and dime. It was very, very, very intense. One move after another, meeting with the neighbors and meeting with like I mentioned about meeting with that one who was very upset because we didn't have the road the way they wanted us. And so some things like that. I would say that if somebody was going to start camp, they better just make up their mind that there's going to be a lot of hurdles coming in, but you meet those step by step, and that's how we did it here. I recall my own self, because I was involved very much in getting camp started. We didn't have the telephone bundles like we have now, where you can call anywhere in the United States for nothing. I remember one month I had a $300 and some phone bill, just simply relating to the electric company, the telephone company, the engineers, and the state in relation to all the things that we're in. So in starting a camp, one wants to make sure that he is ready to meet some real hurdles, and I didn't know what I was going to meet. That also, I remember one time there was a chief that was leaving, and he was with a younger group, and he had come in here to camp and not trained. We actually put him practically from his vehicle that he came into the camp, and he became one of the best chiefs that we had. When he left, those boys cried. They cried on his shoulders because they didn't want him to leave. In relation to the starting of camp, I want to say one thing. Regardless what position you are in the start of a camp, set yourself to the fact that there are going to be those people that do not understand, and they become very difficult to deal with, and that's what we had in starting camp. We had some very serious difficulties with personnel that became involved and did not understand and had a difficulty in understanding camp, and therefore it made it very difficult for us to get started. But by God's grace again, we worked through those hurdles and have come to where we are, where we have a strong representation and support from all around. In relation to the director or supervisors coming into the camp, my recommendation would be to them is that they come knowing nothing. Now, there are principles that they will know, but I was pastor in a church, and the thing that was interesting, I had to leave my pastor work at home, back where I came from. I had to come here with a total different frame of mind. I couldn't operate this place like a Christian day school like we operate in our circles. I had to lay that aside. I had to simply come. To the chiefs, I would like to say that they come, and they come as a boy, and they leave as a man. It makes a man out of a young man to be out there as father to those boys for 2 years. Those are some of the things I would like to tell a supervisor or a director, that they cannot come with the principle, with the life that they would have fully. Yes, Christian principles, but there are many things that we just simply have to lay aside.